What's happening, everybody? Welcome in, Jason Priester, Clemson Insider. And yes, I know a week ago I said we were not going to have a show tonight. You have to forgive me. Man, I was a week ahead all last week. It's next Monday that Clemson plays North Carolina, and there will be no show. Apologies for that, man. There was a lot of things I said at the end of that show last week where I was a week ahead. But we are here tonight, nonetheless. Before we get started, thank my sponsors over at A Glass. For when you need a glass, A Glass, all your auto glass needs. They do replacement, repair, 2 locations in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. You can go over there to their website, myaglass.com. Get yourself a free quote today. A Glass. Appreciate those guys for been a long time sponsor now. I think we can say it now. Long time sponsor. Appreciate Stan and all those guys over there. Well, if you're a recruiting fan, this is not your favorite time of the year. We have entered a dead period. Pretty much the whole month of February. It'll kick back. I can't remember the exact date, but right at the end of February, beginning of March sometime, it'll pick back up and we'll start seeing visits take place. I have got a bunch of names confirmed already for the elite retreat on March 8th. Confirmed a couple more today. One of them was running back Carson Baker out of Langston Hughes High School, I think it is. Caden Gebhart was another one I got confirmed today. I think I've got might be more than 20 names now confirmed. I'd have to go back and count them up, but that is going to be a big event. It's usually a big event every year, but I don't know that I remember this many people that were expected to be at it all in the same weekend. But that is always one of Clemson's, at least in the past few years, it's one of Clemson's biggest recruiting events, one of the biggest two, to be quite honest. It kind of sets them up for that big official visit weekend there in June. I would say those are the two most important off-season recruiting dates by far. And this one's going to be a big one because it's going to be the first time a lot of these guys get to interact with Tom Allen, new defensive coordinator, face-to-face, on campus. So big month ahead in March. Nothing, you won't hear a whole lot about recruiting in February again because it's a dead period. We'll say this, though. One last thing about recruiting. I don't know if you've noticed, for those of you that kind of follow it closely, it does look like Clemson's kind of widening the net. It's at least, particularly at offensive line, man. There was a lot of guys that Matt Luke went out and visited during the contact period. Some of them more than once that don't even have offers yet. A couple of those guys are probably more expected to be here that weekend in March. Some of them had never visited before. Obviously, Clemson's not going to offer if you've never visited. So, got to get that box checked for some of them can officially pick up the offer. But if you're a big recruiting fan, there's not a whole lot to talk about in the month of February. Basketball, 6 straight wins go to Raleigh. Knock off a little rust there early in the first half. Chase kind of gets it going in the second half. Knock off NC State. Moved to 10-1 in the ACC. Second time in school history. The year before last, they started 10-1, and the wheels came off. They dealt with some injuries, and they ended up missing the tournament and then lost to Morehead State and NIT, and everybody wants Brownell fired. And next year he comes out and takes them to the Elite Eight. Year after, they're 10-1 again in ACC play. Not getting a whole lot of respect from the AP poll. I'm one of those guys that don't put a whole lot of stock in AP polls or coaches polls for the most part. But at this point, it's becoming kind of ridiculous. When you got a team like Mississippi State, who has lost 5 out of 7, and you continue to rank those guys, and you got a team like Clemson who's won 6 in a row, 10 out of their first 11 in league play. The only ACC loss they have is to Louisville, which is a quad 1 loss, which is, that's not a bad loss at all. It was at Louisville, a team that had been playing really well until they lost the other night. Obviously, Clemson's got a game against Georgia Tech tomorrow at home. They just wrapped up a 3-game road stretch, won all 3. They've actually won their last 4 on the road. I think 5 straight road games in ACC play is a program record. So the next road win, if they could get it, would tie that record if I'm remembering right. And their next road game's at Florida State, but got to be careful that game tomorrow night because that can really be that's like one of those trap game type situations. Got Duke coming into town Saturday. Unfortunately, like I said last week, I said at the top, I was a week ahead on everything last week, man, and I'm not going to be able to go to the Duke game. I hate it, but it's my dad's 80th birthday, which I was thinking was this past weekend and was going to keep me from going to Raleigh. But I ended up going to Raleigh. Can't go to the Duke game, but I'll be back for the North Carolina game. But with Duke coming to town Saturday, they're ranked second. They're unbeaten in ACC play. Clemson's 1 game right behind them in the standings. That sets up for a big one, but you got to beat Georgia Tech first. The way this thing's shaping up, Clemson can knock off Georgia Tech, knock off Duke, and they'll still be right there in those group of schools that says others receiving votes in the AP top 25. But that's neither here nor there. I've seen a lot of people over the past couple of days since the win at North Carolina State talking about how it's like a lot of people believe the Duke game's going to define the season for this team. And I don't know that that's the case, man. Let's say you drop a close one at home to Duke. There is no shame to losing to the number 2 team in the country. Obviously, don't get me wrong. That's a game you want to win. If you want to wrap up the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament, get that double bye, you got to win that game. But if even if you lose it, you can still lock up a double bye. And again, there's no shame in losing to number 2 Duke. It seems like there's a lot of fans putting a lot of expectations on that game, and I can already see it now. If Clemson were to lose, man, there's just the fire Brownell talk is going to start back up, and now he can't win this and he can't win that, even though he's already knocked off Kentucky this year. I mean, sometimes it gets a little bit silly, but I would just caution against putting too much on that one game. There's still a lot of basketball left to be played even after that game. As we sit right now, they got 9 conference games left, I think. So they will have 7 more after they play Duke. So just don't put too much onus on one game. 1 week closer to baseball season. Opening up in Texas this year. Globe Life Field there in Arlington, Texas, home of the Texas Rangers. Me and Robert are actually going to be heading out there. I wish I could have got up there and saw a couple of scrimmages this weekend, but I didn't. I wasn't able to because, like I said, I was in Raleigh Saturday, and I'm going to try to go get to one Sunday. I'm going to try to go up after my dad's birthday party Saturday night so I can be there for the scrimmage Sunday. And Tuesday we'll hear from Eric Bakich one more time before they leave out for Texas, and a couple of players. But big opening. I hate calling it a tournament because it's not real. It's not really a tournament. They call it a showdown. Let's call it a showdown. Let's just say big opening weekend for the baseball team. And don't forget, they're without their head coach the first 2 games of that showdown. Open with Oklahoma State, play Arizona that Saturday, and then Ole Miss on that Sunday. Somehow Clemson gets 2 of the 11 o'clock games, no night game. They play at 11, and 3:30. But that'll let them get back home a little bit earlier Sunday night as opposed to playing the late game. My thoughts on Denson getting his 4th start. I've said it a few times. I think he's a little underrated. Um, 24/7 was, I think, the only service that gave him that 4 star, but there's a lot to like about him. I think he needs to add a little bit of bulk, but he's a true dual threat guy. Um, I'm trying to remember exactly where 24/7 ranks him now, but it's somewhere in the top 15 of all quarterbacks in the country. He's kind of an unknown commodity. Big senior season kind of boosted his stock a little bit, but it's not like teams were beating down his door. But that don't necessarily mean anything. There's a lot of high school players across this country that don't get the recognition they deserve when they're in high school and get overlooked by colleges. There's just high schools all over the place, hidden in nooks and crannies that these colleges just don't get to and look at. But from the little bit of film, that I've seen on him, there's a lot to work with, man. He doesn't, I wouldn't say he has elite arm strength, but he's got plenty enough, to make all the throws. Again, he's a true dual threat guy, man. He can beat you with his legs, he can beat you with his arms. He's really good at making something out of nothing and throwing on the run. It's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see what kind of trajectory he takes at Clemson. Obviously, you would assume he's in store for a red shirt next season with Vizina being the backup. But then you got those two guys coming in 26, and Tate Reynolds and Brock Bradley, particularly Tate Reynolds, who looks like he's got a ton of upside. It'll be fun to watch how all that plays out, and those be some, once Cade moves on, does Vizina make a seamless transition into that starting role, or can a guy like Denson kind of come out of nowhere and win it in his second year, or is Tate Reynolds good enough to win it as a true freshman? You might have a true quarterback battle there ahead of the 2026 season. But yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Denson. I think he's absolutely worthy of getting, a 4 star and being a low 4 star guy. How long before we get the final full details of the ACC and ESPN negotiations? Curious to see any buyout money changes and how much more the 3 schools get. That's going to depend on, when they actually get all the final details worked out and get everything agreed to. Because they're still, Clemson kind of, they kind of they asked to push the last court date back. If I'm remembering that right, I think they did anyways, because they're kind of in negotiations for where the bigger brands like Clemson, Florida State, Miami are going to get a bigger piece of the pie. And it sounds like a much bigger piece of the pie. But a part of those negotiations is making sure that Clemson and Florida State are you can get out at a much more affordable rate in time for the next round of television negotiations. I don't know that we'll get the full details anytime in the next few weeks. I don't know how close they are to getting all the details on that ironed out, but it does sound like it's heading that direction. And I know a lot of people is going to be disappointed in that, but because Clemson's not getting out tomorrow or next year, but really the end goal is you want to be out in time for the next round of television negotiations. Let's say you get out in 2027. I don't know that, let's say the Big Ten or the SEC, I don't know that they're going to be looking to add before the next round of television negotiations anyway. If you get an uptick on some revenue, particularly if it's substantial, that'll make sure you're able to remain competitive until that point. But it does sound like that, or based on what I'm told anyways, that part of those negotiations are making sure that those schools can get out in time for the next set of television negotiations and get out at a much more affordable rate, compared to what it would be now under the current terms. But it still might be a while before we find all that out. Where can we watch the baseball tourney in Texas? I think that streaming service is your only option. I forget what it's called, but yeah, you might have to pay the $8 and hopefully it's at least a decent stream if they're charging $8 a month, man. I don't have I can't even remember the name of it, so I definitely have never used it before. But based on I haven't really asked anybody, but everything I've seen advertised for it, that's the only option right now, and I assume it will be. Did the Gamecock game hurt us that bad? This team is definitely a top 25. I don't think so. I think it's more SEC biased than anything. The South Carolina game, that's a quad 2 loss. I think Clemson's 5-2 in quad 2 games. The other one was to Memphis. Even though Memphis is like number 40 in the net and South Carolina's 90, 91, 92, something like that. They're both quad 2 losses. You look at Mississippi State, they've got a loss to Butler, who's like 87 in the net. So there's not much difference between 87 and 92. And Mississippi State's still ranked. And they've lost 5 out of the last seven. So I don't think there's one loss that's hurting Clemson too bad. I think it's more of, we're starting to see the same kind of bias in the basketball polls that we've seen in the football polls for years. I think there were 9 SEC teams ranked in the top 25 in the preseason. 9. That's over a third of the teams. So to me, that's what it's more about than anything. But again, I do think Clemson not being ranked in the polls is kind of a little bit, or at least in the AP poll, because they are in the coaches poll for the second week in a row. But not being in the AP poll is a little bit of a slap in the face. And I'm not one to usually say those kind of things because I don't buy into it a whole lot, but I do buy into it a little bit here, especially when you see some of the teams that are ranked in front of them. There's really no other logical explanation for it. Where you're ranked at in the net obviously matters more, and Clemson's number 30 there. So, I mean, it kind of coincides, they're ranked. It gives the AP a little bit of justification, but I'm also of the opinion that the net rankings are garbage. I've never been a big fan of them. I don't like the way they're calculated. What I know about them, I don't like the way they're calculated. There's just no way to keep the bias out of the numbers sometimes, no matter how there's always going to be a human component there. And if you notice over the past few years, SEC teams have really started to invest in their basketball programs. And make no mistake, the SEC basketball is much better than it was 5 years ago. They are greatly improved. But if you look at the net rankings, it'll tell you that the ACC sucks. And I don't buy into the ACC being as down as it's made out to be. Is it what it was 5 years ago? No. But I don't believe it's as bad as, people make it out, or some of the national pundits make it out to be. And that also plays into it a little bit. To be fair, the Stars are to some extent a popularity contest. Yeah, to some extent, you can make that argument. Absolutely, there's some politics involved for sure. When the recruiting services are the ones that actually run some of the camps where these kids get evaluated at, it's kind of a conflict of interest. You've got this big rivals thing that they put on, every year, and it's not just one weekend. I mean, it's like this big event that stretches over multiple weekends, and they get evaluated there. Say a kid can't come participate in that thing. Do you think Rivals is going to look at him the same as they do a kid that does come participate in that thing? I don't think so. And it's the same with all of them. And it's also Stars are a way to sell subscriptions. particularly when you get late into a recruiting cycle. Peter Woods is a guy I've used as an example many times. He's a 5-star throughout his recruitment. All of a sudden, in one of the last updates right before signing day, he's dinged down to a 4-star because you can only have 32 5-stars. Well, a committed guy, a guy that's been committed forever and ever, he's not going to help you sell subscriptions. A guy that's not committed, if you can get him bumped up to a 5-star somehow, he's going to help you sell subscriptions, if that makes sense. But yeah, it is in part a popularity contest, but there's, that's why I like to say stars are not the be all end all. They're just one tool. They're a good gauge to start with, but they're certainly not the gauge to finish with. Assuming Clemson wins tomorrow night, how do you compare how big the Duke game is to other big basketball games in the past? Yeah, it's definitely one of the bigger ones. I go back to those games, when Rick Barnes was coach and Clemson was in the top 5 and Wake Forest was in the top 5, and man, they used to have some battles and they just could never get over that Tim Duncan hump. But I remember that's when my wife used to like to sit and watch basketball with me before she got me married. And then after she got the ring on the finger, she didn't have to watch no more with me. She ain't even paying me no attention. Anyways, I don't know how it ranks, right? I don't know how it ranks with those in the past. With Clemson not being ranked, it kind of takes a shine off of it a little bit nationally. You're not getting College Game Day here for it when I thought that was a possibility 2 weeks ago. You are getting Dickie V. He's going to be one of the ones on the broadcast, but I mean, I forget which game they're taking game day to next Saturday. To me, it doesn't have the national appeal that Duke Clemson should. But it probably ranks up there in the top 5. No worse than top 10. There's been some big games in the past. There just haven't been many in a while. I will say it again. I will eat crow. Brownell is getting it done. Also, it was awesome to hear the North Carolina State fans cry after the game. That place was pretty raucous Saturday, man. There were, I think, over 15,000 people there. And we're talking about a North Carolina State team that had lost 5 in a row. And I think all 5 of those, I shouldn't say all 5, but don't let me say all 5, but at least most of those 5 were like, State was right there. Those were winnable games, and they just kind of lost them in heartbreaking fashion. One of them was the Duke, actually. So they've been competitive. So the fans have still been bought in, man. I'm telling you, that place was it was pretty raucous there until about it's probably I don't know 7-8 minutes left in the game when you could tell Clemson was taking control. They started emptying out of there pretty fast, but I don't know how much crying they did after the game. I have to take your word for that one, though. Not worried about losing to Duke. Need to make sure not to lose any bottom. I think this is a very valid point. There are going to be several instances, between now and the end of the regular season where you're facing off with quad 3 and quad 4 teams. Those are the kind of losses that'll hurt you far more than losing to Duke. A win over Duke would absolutely gain you that respect you're not getting right now. But when it comes to seeding and some of the things that actually matter, man, losing to some of the worst team or the not so good teams over the back half of the conference schedule probably hurts you more than losing to quad 1 Duke. Because right now, Clemson does not have a quad 3 loss. They do not have a quad 4 loss. 2 of their losses are quad ones and 2 of their losses are quad twos. And with the net rankings looking so unfavorably on the ACC, you want to make sure it stays that way. No losses to quad three, definitely no losses to quad four teams. I'm more worried about Brownell leaving on his own. IU will be open. I don't know, man. I just kind of see Brownell. Maybe if IU came calling, I mean, he probably would have to give it some serious consideration. I'm not saying he would not think about it or just say no, but that job's been open a few times since he's been at Clemson. He's been there so long now, man. He's just so ingrained in it. Although, it would be, if IU came calling, it'd be hard to say no, man. It'd be hard to say no for sure. You don't have to, when you're at Indiana, you don't have to worry about playing second fiddle to the football team. You're going to be the top program on campus as opposed to Clemson, where you're always playing second fiddle to Dabo and football and stuff. I'm sure Brownell would prefer it be the other way around, but I don't think he's got like any resentment or ill will or anything like that either. I think he's kind of cultivated a pretty good culture at Clemson, particularly, since the advent of the transfer portal. You don't have to, rely on recruiting the high school ranks all the time. You can tap into the portal and fill some gaps, and that's where he's been really good. But it would be interesting to see what happens if IU actually did come calling. End of spring practice. Do we take another transfer in football then in spring practice? What area are you watching the most? Yeah, I don't even think the staff knows right now if they're going to take another portal player or not. I lean towards thinking they will at least look at some options. Whether they actually decide to pull the trigger or not, that's going to depend on what happens in spring. Again, I think we talked about it last week. I think punter's a spot that could be looked at depending on what Jack Smith does in the spring. If some of those younger safeties aren't quite ready yet, maybe they look at adding another safety. It's going to have to get through the spring game and see what happens. As far as what I'm looking at in spring practice, I want to see how Will Help fits in, because I think that was a huge weakness for Clemson last year, the spot opposite of TJ Parker. I want to see how the transfer Jeremiah Alexander fits in and exactly what his role is going to be. Sounds like they, the plan was to play him at Mike, which is where Sammy played a lot last year. Kind of curious to see how things shake out at those 3 linebacker spots. I mean, or 2 linebacker spots really, and see how they juggle those things, because Tom Allen's going to run a lot of 4-2-5. So that's one other thing. And honestly, another thing on defense is, which of those young safeties is going to step up? Where's Ricardo Jones? Is he ready for a full-time role? On the other side of the ball, obviously, to me, the biggest thing will be Gideon Davidson. I think they're kind of expecting him to come in and win that job. And you got to make sure you have another guy or two behind him ready. You can't just go into the season again with one running back. Those guys in that running back room, they're all a year older now. They all should be a year wiser, and they all should be, able to, at least 1 or 2 of them should be able to go out there and play some snaps for you at this point. It's one thing for not wanting to rely on a freshman or a redshirt freshman who's been fumble prone in practice. I understand all that. Just got to get them past that now. You got to have you can't go into the season with just one back. Duke's size, yes, the size is going to be a problem. It's going to be crucial, absolutely crucial for Victor Locken to stay out of foul trouble. If he gets in early foul trouble and has to sit large chunks of minutes in the first half, that is a recipe for disaster. He's going to have to be very mindful of that. And it's something he's been much better at of late. You know, he hasn't gotten in early foul trouble a lot here recently the way he was earlier in the season. So he's been a lot better in that regard, but it's going to be especially critical in that game. And same goes for Ian too. You don't want to see him in, which he doesn't get in foul trouble most of the time, but you definitely don't want to see him get in foul trouble that night. And you need Chase hitting his shots. He needs to be hitting his shots. He was 2 of 5 against North Carolina State Saturday. If he's on, I'd like to see him hit at least 3 or 4 in that game. Bradley I saw that. I can't remember what camp it was he was at. But he got some high praise. I can't remember exactly what was said. I remember retweeting him, but I don't even remember what it said now. But that's a guy that was pretty good there at his high school there at Spain Park this past season. He's one of those under the radar guys. I think that's a smaller high school he plays at there in Alabama. He's one of those guys that if you ever talked to him a couple of times, you knew if Clemson offered, he was one of those guys that was going to be in the fold. But yeah, it's going to be real interesting. You know, it's always interesting when you take 2 quarterbacks in the same class. You know, then when you add Denson to the mix, I am very anxious to see how all that unfolds. ESPN did all they could to keep FSU and Clemson AC, and I don't think they even cared. Yeah, they did everything they could to keep them in the fold and keep them happy, because without Clemson and FSU, there is no ACC. It will fall apart. It will be relegated to G5 status, G4 status, group of whatever, however many there are now. Maybe not in the literal sense, but from a perception standpoint, you know, you lose Clemson and Florida State, it's over for the ACC, and the ACC knows that. They've known it for the whole time. You know, nobody even knew that this option was in there until Florida State found it when they were, you know, combing through the paperwork in preparation for their lawsuit, and they brought it up in their suit. I was kind of hoping ESPN wasn't going to pick up the option, but I always kind of figured they would, because they get ACC at such a discounted rate. They got to be making bank on it, and we're talking about a network that's losing money. I do think the ACC absolutely cares about keeping Clemson and Florida State in the fold. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making all these concessions in some of these negotiations to try to keep them happy, and try to get these lawsuits settled and going away. I see Hamilton from FSU is leaving. Brownell is going to be the longest tenure coach in the ACC. Do you think he's handled the transfer portal better than the other coaches that have left recently? Yeah, well, anybody that's been keeping up with the news there with Leonard Hamilton in Florida State could probably see the writing on the wall that this was going to be his final year. He's kind of been in the news in a not so good way in recent weeks. But if you're asking me about some of these other coaches that like Tony Bennett from Virginia and some of these other coaches that have moved on and cited the changing landscape as reasons why they're stepping away, then yeah, I think Brownell's kind of navigated this ever-changing landscape better than some of those other guys. He's kind of embraced it with open arms. He said in the past that, if he had his preference, I want to say he said this anyways. I think his views are kind of similar to Dabo's. He prefer to just be like it used to be, but it's not. And Clemson's always had trouble recruiting big time talent out of high school when it comes to basketball. What better way than to get them than guys that are looking to move on from somewhere else? I mean, that's how he's had his most success. He's navigated the portal very well. He's had some NIL backing to do it. That makes it easier. But yeah, he's embraced it better than some of these other guys. He's embraced it and handled it better than some of these other guys have. Do you think about Adam Randall moving to running back? Does he make an impact in 25? I like it. It was obvious that he, by the end of the season, it was obvious that he was, passed by. And I don't know that he was ever the same receiver after, the issues with the knees. And it wasn't just ACL. He had something went on with his other knee too. I forgot what it was, but he had to have cleaned up. I've had somebody tell me he didn't look like the same dude. But yeah, I think it's a good move for him. Is he going to win the starting job? I doubt it. Is he going to be the backup? I guess it's possible. I don't know that I'd bet on it. Is he going to be a guy that can help you? Absolutely. You saw that in the Texas game. And like I said before, from my understanding, they taught him 4 running plays and no pass protections. So once he's had an entire offseason to kind of learn the playbook from a running back standpoint and work on picking up some of those pass protections, that's what's going to be key for him. Getting the pass protections down and knowing, where to be and picking up blitzes and those kind of things. If he get that down, man, yeah, I think he's going to help the team as a running back. Not saying he's going to win the starting job or anything, but again, I think we all saw this year, you got to have more than one running back. When Moffitt got hurt, Clemson's running game just disappeared completely. And running backs take too much of a beating to have just one. So, yeah, I think he's going to help. Does the AP writer's opinions impact NCAA choice of 64? I would say the net rankings impact them more than anything. So that's why I think in the grand scheme of things, the polls just don't mean a whole lot. Clemson baseball ranked number 7. And yeah, I had somebody tell me that D1 baseball picked them 7th in the ACC. I don't subscribe to D1 baseball, so I didn't see it with my own eyes. They were picked to finish 4th by the coaches in the ACC and picked to finish behind Virginia. I forgot who else. So Virginia was picked to win the league. It might have been Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida State. I can't remember. But I think the ACC is going to be brutal this year, man. I think it's going to be really good as it was last year. It's another good thing about opening up the season there, playing those 3 solid teams, get you prepared for, playing South Carolina, a couple of weeks later. In past years, usually South Carolina is your first big-time opponent. Now you've already played a big-time opponent or two before you play South Carolina and before you get into ACC play. Seen kids ranked at a 3-star and over 40 offers. Yeah, I look at who's offered them. I should have added that earlier. That's a very good point. If you look at who's offered them, that's a really good gauge. If you see a guy that's a 3-star, man, and he's got offers from Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, that kind of tells the tale, right? Yeah, that's absolutely a pretty good gauge. Be very interesting to see Tate and Brock compete, and we'll both stay committed. I know Tate is locked in at Clemson, but I don't know much about Brock. Brock committed after Tate, so he did it knowing all about Tate and knowing he was on board. Tate's also a Major League Baseball prospect. He's told me on more than one occasion he is locked in and 100% coming to play football at Clemson, but man, you always got to prepare for it just in case. I see Brock as one of those guys that I've had several conversations with Brock Bradley, and you can tell Clemson's where he wanted to go play. That's just he's worked out at camp there for I forget how many years in a row. So he's very familiar with it. He's very familiar with the culture and the way things are done there, and it's just the place he wants to be. I have a hard time seeing Brock decommitting. Maybe if he were to blow up as a senior and all these other teams start jumping in on him and he gets, a better opportunity at early playing time or some other kind of things, maybe that creaks the door open a little bit, but I don't even know if that would do it, man. You run across those one guy here and one guy there that they just love everything about Clemson and they know that's where they want to go no matter what. To me, Brock Bradley kind of falls in that category. How is South Carolina a quad 2 loss? Because that's the way they're set up. They are ranked 90-something in the net. That was a road game, and quad 2 road games, the cutoff is number 135. So they can drop all the way to 135 in the net, and it'll still be a quad 2. For home games, the numbers 31 through 75. Neutral is 51 through 100, and road games is 76 through 135. So they're not even on. They're firmly entrenched as a quad 2. They'll have to take a pretty big dive, and the way the net rankings are set up, even if they keep losing, they're going to keep losing to these SEC teams with good net rankings, so they're probably not going to take that big a hit the way it's set up. I am football first always, but how much revenue share will be given to the basketball and baseball programs? I do not want those programs falling off. I think about 19 million is going to football. So, and pretty much the rest of it will go to basketball. I don't know that baseball get much, if anything. That's why Eric Backett has been, so determined to get his guys exposure so they can create more a better brand for themselves and try to help generate a little more NIL money for those guys, because they're not gonna see anything significant when it comes to the rev share. Who's going to be the standout tight end now? Olsen Pat Henry is gonna have opportunities. The kid that redshirted last year, Christian Betancourt, that guy, he's got the potential to be a star. He's not quite as tall as Brennan Stool, but he's not far off. You know, he's another big, tall, long, athletic target that you can split out there. I am kind of looking for him to take a big jump this year, but you know, Pat Henry's already proven that he can do it in the passing game. He can do it in the blocking game. He's not afraid to get in there and mix it up and do the dirty work with the blocking stuff. To me, those would be the two names at the top of the list. Do you think Clemson tries to find a top wide receiver to replace AW after this year by the portal, or do they stick with TJ and Wesco and just wait to develop a high school kid? That might depend on what happens with the 26 class. You know, they're going after the Naheem Burrows kid. They're going after Darian Morgan. You know, they've set their sights high on a couple of guys, and don't forget Tyler Brown's right there that can slide right in Antonio's spot too. So I mean, it'll just depend what the roster looks like. You know, after the season's over, does anybody leave that you're not expecting to leave? There's a lot of variables that factor into that. There's just, you know, this is so far away, although it'll be here before you know it. But it's, you know, we're talking about a year from now, and it's hard to project what might happen, you know, between now and then. But you know, Dabo is always going to prefer to go the high school route. He's not going to go to the portal unless he feels like he's got an immediate need, an immediate, you know, a a, a gap that needs to be filled. Immediate need, that's the better way to say it, unless he's got an immediate need at a spot. We'll see if they have an immediate need there. I tend to lean towards it just by Antonio leaving. I don't, you know, those are big shoes to fill, but Tyler Brown's a pretty good receiver, pretty good slot receiver. You know, I don't think they'll have any problem handing the reins over to him. If Clemson is going to beat Duke, Wiggins is going to be critical. If he guards Cooper Flagg, must make Flagg work on defense too. Yeah, Wiggins is kind of one of those enigmas. He's got all the physical characteristics you want. he's just still trying to put it all together. He's gotten a lot better about not hanging around the 3-point line and being a little bit more aggressive. He's got to be more aggressive on the boards. He didn't have a single rebound against North Carolina State the other day. And I don't get the impression that Brad was very happy about that after the game. But it will be it'll be interesting to see how they decide to defend Cooper Flagg. If they go one guy or use different guys, you know, that's going to be a key aspect for sure. But to me, whether he guards Cooper Flagg or not, he's got to make his guy work, whoever he's guarding, and he's got to get on the boards better. And even though he's made some improvements in being more aggressive and going to the paint and going to the basket a little bit more, I still think there's another step he can take there. FSU was worst team in the ACC, so by the model suggested, they will not garner much money. By the performance model, yeah, they wouldn't have made any money in that regard. But this new thing they're working on is more about brand and television ratings and those kind of things. So yeah, they would absolutely, depending on the kind of ratings they drew. And it's not just about ratings. There's other things that go into it. I can't even remember. It gets complicated how they figure out the best brands. But yeah, Florida State would have made some money for sure. Even though they had a bad season, they're still one of the bigger brands. Yes, sir. Well, I'll see you in Texas, my man. And I told you wrong last week about not going to Raleigh. I was getting dates all mixed up in my head, man, and I was actually there. I thought I might see you there. Any thoughts about Ohio State's offensive line coach leaving and how that may affect the recruits Clemson is trying to land? It can't hurt. That is for sure. Ohio State has lost their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and their offensive line coach. And their defensive coordinator bolted over to rival Penn State. The other two left for NFL jobs. Clemson's kind of going head to head with Ohio State for a couple of offensive linemen, Maxwell Riley, Adam Guthrie. And I know there's been a couple crystal balls put in for Adam Guthrie. I don't think he's that close to deciding yet. I do really like where Clemson sits at the moment, and I do think the offensive line coach leaving Ohio State impacts that. I think it impacts Riley too, which that one I think Clemson and Ohio State's kind of right there neck and neck. Just they can get. Riley's one of those guys that can't be here for the elite retreat on March 8th due to his track schedule. So they got to figure out another date to get him in there during the spring. Got to get him back one more time, hopefully, before he makes a decision, because he's getting kind of close. He told me toward the end of the year that he could see himself deciding as early as January or February. He's not going to pull the trigger that quick, but I could see him doing it after taking a couple of spring visits. But yeah, all that to say, yeah, it definitely cannot hurt. Offensive linemen, for the most part, just generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions to this, but most of them aren't commanding these big money deals. For offensive linemen, man, it's about development and who can develop them and get them into the league. That is as big a part of it as anything. And Matt Luke has got a track record of doing that. Clemson might not have one, but Matt Luke does. And hopefully after he's been there a couple of years, Clemson will have that track record. It'll be a short one. It'll be a small one, but baby steps. You got to start somewhere. But, that track record, I've talked to a lot of these offensive line targets. I've talked to Riley. I've talked to Guthrie. And Luke's track record really resonates. Now, if Ohio State goes out and hires some big-time O-line coach, that might end up helping him a little bit, but he's still going to be playing catch-up from a relationship standpoint. So all that to say, again, it definitely can't hurt, man. It gives you, that's one more. It's not a negative development. How much does Clemson have to pay Wes after he got another job? They owed him 1.5 for next year, 1.6 for the year after. Take whatever he's going to make at Oklahoma off of it, and they owe him the rest. I think that's how that works. Yeah, I had it right. Virginia, Florida State, North Carolina, then Clemson. Yeah, this definitely sets up as a trap game. Good news is you get Georgia Tech at home. You don't have to go out on the road. But Georgia Tech right now, they're 128 in the net. Um, so that would be a quad 3 loss since it's at home. Yeah, quad 3. Look at it and make sure I was saying right, but it'll be a quad 1 game for Georgia Tech, and they are 1 and 5 against quad 1 teams. They lost to Oklahoma, North Carolina, Duke, SMU. They lost to Clemson already. Last time out, though, they beat Louisville, who was red hot. So this is definitely not a team Clemson can overlook. If they overlook if they overlook Georgia Tech, kind of looking ahead to Duke, they will suddenly find themselves in trouble tomorrow night. Don't put much stock in not being ranked. We seem to play a lot better when not ranked. Anyway, you beat Duke and they can't leave you out next week. Yeah, none of that's untrue. But the fact that some of those, to me, the only thing is, and again, I'm with you here. I don't put a whole lot of stock into polls because they're basically meaningless. But there is no logical explanation for a couple of those teams that are currently being ranked ahead of Clemson. There's just nothing logical somebody can say to me to make me buy a team like Mississippi State should be ranked ahead of Clemson. So the biggest thing is it's just kind of a slap in the face, and you hope they use that as fuel, and it ends up propelling them to play better. Yes, Eric said last week that he expects Cam to be 100% by opening day. I know Cam said on the same day he was 85% right then. But I watched him play a couple of scrimmages last weekend, not this weekend that just passed, but the weekend before, and he looks good to go. Will Dietrich Pennington see the field this year? And if so, that's a good question. They were extremely high on him coming out of high school. I remember talking to Dietrich's high school coach right after he committed or signed with Clemson. And he told me that Dietrich was a guy, and he, you're going to hear this from most high school guys. I think I've said this, or high school coaches. I think I've said this before, but sometimes you can tell when they really believe it. And this guy really believed it. He really believed that Dietrich was going to come in and be on the field sooner rather than later. But man, it took him a while for the light to come on. Then he's kind of had some injury struggles. He missed all of last year, hurt pretty much. He's got the talent. The first time he was hurt, he ended up coming back being out of shape and kind of overweight. If he doesn't do the same thing here and he comes back in the right shape and the light finally comes on, or Luke can bring it out of him or whatever, he's got the potential. I think a lot of that's going to be up to him, and some of it's going to be luck by staying healthy. Think Tom Allen identifies any gaps in our roster and opts to check the portal? If you listen to him talk about the portal, he's got the same philosophy that Dabo does. If you didn't know it was Tom Allen and if he kind of sounded like Dabo, you would have thought it was Dabo speaking when he was talking about the portal at his introductory press conference. Clemson's tight on numbers, man. They're right at 85 right now. You can't get to 105 until fall. So, I mean, I don't think it's going to be about him identifying gaps in the roster. If there was another gap that Dabo thought needed to be addressed, I think he'd already addressed it. I don't think one new coach is going to come in and say, hey, man, there's this gap here that none of the other coaches in that building have yet to see, if that makes sense. Whether they go to the portal, to me, it's going to depend on what happens in the spring. Again, they're going to need a younger safety or two to step up. What happens at punter is going to impact that. But unless they have some guys leave, numbers are really tight. They're not going to be able to go out and add 2 or 3 guys. They don't have the room for it without some people moving on. But I don't think the philosophy is going to change just because there's a new defensive coordinator. My thoughts on Boulware and Boyd being promoted to recruiters. Well, Boyd is yet to get that promotion because Garrett Riley's still been out on the road. We'll see if Garrett comes off the road. I don't think this is that big a deal. I've talked about it before. I think a guy like Boulware, with his personality, with his attitude, his pedigree from when he played at Clemson, those are the ingredients for a guy that can recruit. What he's doing is kind of going out and teaching some of these kids about Clemson. It looks like since Wes has left and Ben's come on board that they've kind of identified a couple of new targets they want to go after. The real recruiting will be done once they get them on campus. So that would be the trick with Boulware, is convincing them to come to campus and see what it's all about and selling them what Clemson has to offer. But I think he's certainly 100% capable of doing that. Again, he's got the personality, he's got the pedigree. He can relate with, I think he probably relates to some of these kids much better than Wes did. This might end up being a plus when it's all said and done, that you decided to keep Tom Allen in the facility. Because again, it's not that Tom Allen's not going to recruit. You can always jump on a Zoom call or FaceTime or whatever if you need to have a face-to-face with a kid. And the most important recruiting is going to go on when they get you on campus for those events like the Elite Retreat and the big official visit weekend. But we'll see what they decide to do on the other side of the ball. I'm not 100% convinced Garrett wants to come off the road. He's a guy that I think likes to go out and do those kind of things, but we'll see what Dabo decides to do. The baseball show next Tuesday. I even had to date for that wrong last week because I was a week ahead, man. I was thinking the Duke basketball game was this past Saturday and we was going to Texas this week. So I think I said last week that we were starting it tomorrow, but it's next Tuesday. The first thing that will air will probably air it sometime tomorrow, but it's going to be recorded. It's not going to be a live show. But the first one's going to be next Tuesday, and then we're aiming to do it on every Thursday after that. Since we're going to Texas, I'm going to be going Wednesday and Thursday, so we can't do it on Thursday next week. And we might have to adjust the schedule here and there depending on who Clemson's playing that week and what days, because there's more than one Thursday, Friday, Saturday series this year. But next Tuesday, it's going to be – I've tweaked it a little bit since the last time I talked about it. I think it's going to be myself alongside Ashby Mixon, who works for us there at TCI. Yeah, I'm going to really like her, man. She's a baseball nerd too, man. So she really knows her stuff. And again, look forward to first thing to drop sometime tomorrow. We're going to sit down and talk to Coach Bakich in the morning, and I should have that ready up on the YouTube channel sometime by tomorrow afternoon. But next Tuesday, I think we're going to call it Rounding the Bases. Not 100% decided yet. Position group that is hardest to evaluate during recruit. Oh, offensive line. For sure, man. Especially for me, because I'm not a talent evaluator of offensive linemen. I kind of live by the, you know it when you see it. If I'm watching offensive lineman at camp or something, sometimes you just know it when you see it. That's kind of me with offensive linemen, but they're so hit and miss, man. It's hard to gauge how good an offensive lineman's going to be by what he does in high school. Just don't. It doesn't. He can be as dominant as anybody in high school, and it just doesn't always translate. So I would say offensive lineman for sure. Stepping on well, I've actually talked to Vandervoort about this Sunday, and he's going to hold off and do his Wednesday next week and let us go Tuesday. So much appreciation to Steeler Will there. I do got to make sure to remind him so he doesn't forget that. But yeah, he's gonna let me step on his toes next Tuesday night. Is Ashby going to cover it? I would almost bank on it. So we will actually have somebody that can talk about softball too. Since I usually cover only baseball, we'll have somebody that has been over there and watched them and will know about softball if that's what y'all want to talk about sometimes. Yeah, we're going to have people over there. Yeah, I'm sure she'll be there. Want to thank everybody that has tuned in tonight, even though I told you not to. I'm telling you again, don't tune in next week because I'm not going to be here. I got the date right this time. Clemson, North Carolina basketball next Monday. We are going to step aside and let those guys take the spotlight. No, just kidding. I'm actually going to be at the game. Then Tuesday night, Ashby and I will have our first live baseball show. Think we're going to do it at 7:00, just like I do the Monday show every week at 7:00. And after that, again, like I said a minute ago, we're going to aim for doing it on Thursdays. Want to thank my sponsor, A-Glass, for all your auto glass needs. When you need a glass, call A-Glass. 2 locations, one in Florence, one in Sumter. The numbers are running across the bottom of the screen right there. You can get yourself a free quote today, myaglass.com. In Florence, you can find them there at 2022 South Irby Street. In Sumter, 3325 Carter Road. A-Glass for when you need a glass. All your auto glass needs, replacement and repair. John says he's going to tune in next week just to make sure. I will be in Little John next week, 7 p.m. I think that's whatever time the game starts. I think it's a 7 o'clock tip. I'm not sure, but I will not be here. I'll be in Clemson. Anybody interested in sponsoring the show, reach out to me and on Facebook, Twitter, private message me. I'm easy to get a hold of, and we can discuss it there. Off next week. First baseball show Tuesday night. Myself and Ashby Dixon. Thank all of y'all that tuned in tonight. Again, even though I told you not to, before y'all get out of here, hit that like button and definitely hit that subscribe button. Check us out, ClemsonInsider.com. And I will see you guys next week.